Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Henry Schein Dental Academy webinar series. My name is Adam, Marketing Specialist, and I'll be your moderator. Today, we're welcoming Jill Hasselmann as our speaker, as she will explain how to retain top talent. Jill is the Director of Business Development for HR for Health. Before we get started, we have a few reminders. At any point during the webinar, we do encourage your participation. Please type any questions you might have into the Q&A section of your control panel, and we'll answer them live at the end of the presentation. Henry Schein is not offering CE credit for viewing or attending this presentation live or on demand. And this webinar is sponsored by Henry Schein's Dental Business Institute, as well as HR for Health. Jill, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Hi, everyone. Man, is it a good time to be an employee in the dental industry right now? Dental employees seem to have tons of options when it comes to who they're working for. And it can feel like you, as the practice owner, are finding less and less suitable candidates, and that as the dental employees' opportunities increase, that maybe yours decrease for finding good candidates. And so that's why it's so important not to only hire correctly, which we're going to talk a lot about today, but how to hire, not to fire, how to hire with the intent of retaining our team so that we don't have to continue to replace our different team members. And the truth is that dentistry has been experiencing almost 100% employment, sometimes depending on where you are, 100% employment for some time now. And the curveballs that COVID has brought throughout the last year has really not helped in this arena. A lot of you were probably in a boat where you either laid off your employees or had to furlough them about a year ago, and that resulted in a struggle in trying to bring people back in some instances, or they weren't able to come back, and trying to find good talent has been really hard since then. And of course, what that means is the employees that we're working with, our team members day in and day out, know that they have options and they want a great experience at work. And so today we're going to discuss how to hire, not to fire, as I mentioned. And, we'll even sprinkle some tidbits in there for how to retain your current team. It's not just about your new hires, but what are you doing for your current team to help make sure that you're retaining them? And as we get started today and go through the next hour of all of the content, I want us to start by thinking, really, why are you hiring? Are you hiring because you're having to replace employees? Or are you hiring because you're growing? Because those are two different things. That's an important distinction. And of course, there are things that are out of our control for retention. And sometimes we just have to replace employees. But the goal is to only replace them when absolutely necessary and really have your team helping you grow. And that's why you're hiring additional team members. There's a lot of pitfalls and risk liabilities when it comes to hiring. So we're going to talk about that, how to make sure that you are you're following the correct steps when posting for jobs, when asking questions during interviews, when going through the hiring process. But we know that most practices struggle with retention. We know that hiring is the place that most practices are focusing right now. HR for Health sent out a survey to thousands of dentists with responses back of the number one thing that is a stress point right now is finding good people. And we understand that. But hopefully we can help you to not have to find new people to replace, but just find new people to help you grow. Because most practices are struggling with retention and maybe don't realize that starting with a strong onboarding process can actually improve your new hire retention by 82%. So if you are hiring to replace, this is the perfect time to think about why you're having to replace employees, and then learn how to hire correctly so that you are protected from start to finish as you're onboarding your team. And the reality is, in the year of 2021, here we are, your employees are used to a certain level of efficiency and ease of automation as a consumer. Think about how easy it is for them to order something online. Classic example, Amazon. Think of how easy it is for them to not just place that order, but rely on getting almost an instant result. And the reality is that your employees, current and future, are now expecting the same experience at work as they are getting as a consumer. So they expect transparency and ease of use when it comes to working for you. And practices that don't have certain systems in place or are not providing technology, for example, to their team, maybe just haven't yet been able to implement it, may not realize that the impact that is having on your team day to day as they are working for you and trying to get their tasks done. Are you giving them the best way so that they can work the best for you and showing them that you really value their employment? And so today we're going to try to go through a lot of that to explain how can you use technology, how can you bring in software, and how can you use that to not just be compliant, but also show your employees that you appreciate them and that you don't want them going anywhere. So a little bit on HR for Health. We were founded by an employment attorney who specializes in working with dentists. So over 10 years ago, he realized that employee handbooks were not enough. His clients, his doctors, he only works with doctors, were still getting sued by their employees for really, really small things. And employee handbooks and, you could call your lawyer, those things existed, but he realized there needed to be more. And so that's why we created the first and only software that is dedicated to helping medical and dental practices stay compliant year round. Not only that, we've checked the box for compliance, but now we are really looking at how do we give our team the best experience when it comes to their employment, and how do we manage them in a way that is efficient and makes them feel autonomous and have transparency in their day-to-day. So a little bit of what we're going to go through today. First, we're going to talk about recruiting. So how do we post for a job correctly? What to include in that posting? And what to ask while you're interviewing. Really, really important, but more importantly, what not to ask while you are interviewing. Offer letters and background checks. How do you extend the offer so the practice and the employee are set up for success so that you are protected and they are getting all the information that they need and set up to have success from day one. And then how to onboard and have a new hire process that is the best way possible to focus on retention. So how do we give them a great experience from day one once we do decide that they are a good candidate and that they have accepted the offer that we have extended to them. So before we get started, we do have 2 resources that we're really excited to extend to everybody that has attended this webinar. So in order to get those resources, you will text the number 44222, and then you will text the word talent21. So in the number you're sending it to, you'll do 44222 in your text box, talent21. And a couple resources you're going to get from this. The first one is the interview questions of what not to ask and what you can ask instead. So we're going to go through that in detail today, but just first and foremost, you'll get that resource. I will also show it at the end and kind of throughout, but that's the first one. And then the second one is a list of all of the federal new hire documents that you're required to give to your employees on day one. A little hint, if you see documents on that list that your current team doesn't have, probably a good idea to also give those to them. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. One final thing before we get fully started is you can also request a free HR analysis. So what this is our team actually walks through an assessment with you and will give you a risk rating score at the end based on certain things that you have set up in your practice. And then from there can help provide some recommendations of how to lower your risk score, because we want that as low as possible on your HR compliance. So the interview questions not to ask, the new hire documents, that list of the new hire documents, and then as well as the free HR analysis that our team is happy to do for you. So let's look at some stats to get started. So turnover is costing us probably more than we realize. I think we know that it's costing us a lot of stress, a lot of time spent, but there's actually it's 6 to 9 months of an employee salary that it's costing you to replace somebody. So this is a stat from SHRM, Society for Human Resource Management. And so 6 to 9 months to replace an employee. So if an employee is making $60,000 a year, let's say, that is about $30,000 to $45,000 in recruiting and training costs. So really, really costly for us to have to deal with this turnover. And there's about over $10,000 a year wasted in ineffective onboarding practices. So there's on average 54 administrative tasks to onboard a new employee. That's a lot of tasks. And depending on how you're doing those tasks, if you're doing some of them at all, maybe you're not, but depending on how efficiently or not efficiently you're doing them, it can cost you over $10,000 that's just being wasted. In addition, looking at the penalties just for missing an I-9. I-9 is the most classic document that we can think of when onboarding an employee, right? Everybody knows what that is. It is verifying that an employee can work in the United States, but not doing this correctly, maybe just not having it at all because you think you can work in the US, no problem. You worked for my friend down the street. There's no way that you aren't able to be authorized to work in the United States. That penalty is anywhere from $500 to $5,000 just for having a missing one. That's not even employing somebody that is not eligible to work in the United States. And that's just the first offense. So when we look at these stats, so again, the goal today is to how can we help you avoid these? HR for Health Solution is a very proactive approach. We want to save you money to not have to spend all this, especially for fines plus attorney fees. And so let's look at how can we reduce that? And to start off, we are going to have a poll, Adam. So if you want to put the first poll up, how many positions have you hired for in the past 6 months? I'll give everyone a second to answer that. 0, no one, you haven't had to hire for anyone in the past 6 months. 1 to 3, 3 to 5 positions, 5 to 7, 7 plus. I'll give everyone a few seconds to answer that.
It's looking like the overwhelming majority is within the 1 to 3 range, although I do want to note that 4 people have hired 7 plus.
Wow. 7 plus employees, that is a lot. So for all of you that are either, for a majority of you that are looking 1 to 3, that you're replacing those positions, for 4 people or maybe a little more than 4 that have had to hire for more than 7, that's more than 1 a month, I can't imagine. But for those people who are having to do that, there are general requirements for job postings, applications, salary inquiries, equal pay, background check processes, and that's all even before you get to onboarding. So there's a lot of things to keep in mind. And of course, as with anything, there are state-specific requirements that we absolutely want you to keep in mind. Today, we're going to keep it more at the federal level. So again, our team is always available if you have questions about your specific state's compliance. But where we want to start with recruiting is really creating a roadmap. What's our intention for hiring? Who are we looking to hire? Do we have job descriptions? If not, we need to develop those because that's going to help us know what we're really looking to gain. What does this position need? What's the experience and qualifications? Especially for those of you that might be replacing existing employees. If you're trying to just bring somebody in to do a position that didn't have clear expectations before, that didn't have clear guidelines outlined, now is the time to do that. Because if you're bringing somebody in that same position, how are they going to succeed? So we want to learn from maybe some of our, if we haven't had processes in place or really knowing what do I need out of this position, that now's the time to do it. So that's identifying what experience and qualifications does this position need? How many people do I need in this position even? What would happen if I eliminated this position? Would I be able to work as effectively? Being able to set the job duties and expectations and make sure that you have a guide for training and identifying the responsibilities for that training. And the job description aspect, we're going to help you to create an outline of how to create a job description, but I cannot stress enough how important that is. Even if it feels like as you're in the recruiting process, it's too early, the reality is not. It's not too early because we're going to use these job descriptions and among other things for our job posting. So once we've identified what position we need, what we're ready to recruit for, because we know how that position is going to contribute to our office, then it's important to outline the day-to-day expectations and the job requirements. So this is the job duties, the certifications and degrees required, years of experience required, if applicable, as well as what about your practice? So as much as the job duties are important, it's also important to ensure that candidates can feel who you are as a practice. What's your culture like? What do you value? What are you looking for in those soft skills from an employee paired with what you're expecting them to be able to do on a day-to-day basis? In addition to writing out what the role requires and what the practice is looking for and what the culture is, you absolutely need to look at having an employment application. This is going to be part of your application screening process. And this is how you're going to get transparency from the get-go. So you need to have every single employee fill out an employment application when they come to apply for you, and make sure that you retain that employment application, even if you didn't hire them. It's going to be really important. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The employment application is where you get to ask some of the burning questions that you might really want to know that maybe you are asking in a certain way right now that isn't as kosher as it could be. So this is where you can ask questions about the candidate, like, are you 18 years or older, instead of how old are you? That's really what you want to know is, can you work? Are you legally allowed to work? Are you of age? Also, are you legally authorized to work in the US? You can have that on your employment application, yes or no, having them say yes, they're signing this document. Also asking for their availability. You don't have to necessarily lay out a schedule for them. Of course, you can write up front, but just asking them their availability can help you to eliminate or continue to move this applicant forward based on what they provide you that they're available to work. It is really important that you are using a compliant employment application. However, definitely want to be aware that there are cities and states that have enacted rules called ban the box legislation. So this is, it's prohibiting employers from asking applicants if they've been convicted of a felony on their initial job application. So that's where the ban the box comes from, is that box on the job application of checking off about if they have been convicted of a felony that you want to make sure is state compliant. So if you are unsure whatsoever, please reach out to our team, because we don't want that to inhibit you from using an employment application, but definitely something to be aware of. And just a reminder, you do not want to reject an applicant based on the criminal conviction. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission actually says that if you are going to reject somebody based on the information you learn, that conviction needs to be relevant to the job. So once again, very important to have an outline of what does this job entail, because if they're convicted of something that really isn't relevant to your office, then that's something that you might want to reconsider before rejecting them. So just a caution to look out for that. Make sure you're asking really great questions on that application, but nothing that could get you into trouble. And again, our team can absolutely help with that. Now, job descriptions is absolutely going to be the heart of your job posting. So this is going to be what communicates to each individual what their contribution is. But before you even hire them, it's important for you to know, what does this individual contribute to our overall goal? We're going to use this as the basis for performance reviews, and we're going to want to use this as the growth path. Where are they going? But in order, the best place to start is at a job analysis. What is the job? Reviewing the responsibilities of the current employees and analyzing all of what they need to do, maybe not what the current position is doing, but what does your office really, really need to get into that growth mode and get to a place where you are able to retain employees, and understanding what are the important outcomes. And if you yourself have never done the job, which happens before, if you don't have job descriptions and you're trying to write a job description for each position, but you haven't necessarily done the position yourself, I would recommend talking with those employees that are currently in the position or familiar with the ins and outs of the day-to-day. You can get an idea of what are the expectations that should be established for this person. Because we're going to use the job description for a couple things. We're going to, of course, use them to have a job posting so that we're clearly communicating to our applicants and we're attracting the people we want to attract. It's based on the expectations of the role. But we're also going to use this as an expectation for employees once we hire them. So whoever we hire, we're going to give them this job description so that we can use that as a basis for their growth. We're also going to use the job description as a basis or even an explanation for why you did not hire other applicants because they were not up to par or able to do what you have laid out in your job description. So that's really, really important for protecting yourself. And what needs to go into a good job description? So first of all, using an accurate title, plain English, what is their title? Their salary range and their working days. So every position should have a set salary range to avoid any sort of issues with discrimination claims or just anything that can go wrong with not paying people on the same sort of scope. So making sure your position has salary range and then the working days. When do you need them to be in the office? That doesn't necessarily mean you schedule them for all of those days. You're saying this position needs to be able to work Monday through Friday, for example. Also, writing a brief summary of the overview of the job. What does success look like? What qualifications do they need? Education and work experience is really big. Then listing the essential functions. Here is where this is the secret sauce of a job description. This is if nothing else I've said you care about or don't think the job descriptions are as important as I'm saying, I'm telling you right now, the essential functions and physical requirements, you'll thank me later when you have these new job descriptions, because what essential functions do is you're laying out, these are the basic job duties that an employee must be able to perform without reasonable accommodation. So today is not about disability or accommodating leave of absence or anything like that, but this is the basis of saying you have to be able to perform these jobs without reasonable accommodation. Because if somebody says that they cannot sit, if your dental assistant says, I have to stand up every 5 minutes, and you don't have that as an essential function in your job, in their job role, it's harder to prove or it's harder to navigate. When you have it in writing and it's just signed off on, it's so much easier to say, here are the expectations, here's my essential functions. So factors to consider in determining if a function is essential is whether the reason the position exists is to perform that function, the number of other employees available to perform the function or among whom the performance of the function can be distributed. So are there other team members who could take it on? Or are they the only one in the practice? Do you only have one hygienist in the practice? And then the degree of expertise or skill required to perform the function. So really important. And good news is your judgment as to which functions are essential is up to you. But you really want to have those written down and prepared before the interview, because if you do not hire somebody because of XYZ reason, and you think it's because of an essential function reason, you definitely want to have that written down beforehand so it's really clear if anything was ever questioned by the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And then one little tidbit, word of advice, this can include attendance. So if regular attendance is an essential function of the job, put it in there. You absolutely are able to say you have to be regularly and reliably able to attend work. In addition, the physical requirements, really, really big. So this should specify the weight limits that they need to be able to lift. So for example, if they need to be able to lift at least 20 pounds, write that in. It should also specify how often an employee in that position is going to perform those functions. So for example, like occasionally, frequently, 50% of the time. So you want to be able to say you need to be able to lift 25 pounds at least 50% of the time. And then avoid including physical demands that are not essential to the position. So you cannot exclude individuals with disabilities who would have otherwise been capable of performing these functions just because you want to have a blanket statement of all these physical demands could possibly come up. So make sure it's focused in what is actually needed for the position. because you want to have fair, non-discriminatory, based on experience and other job-related factors when you're creating your job description. Last but not least, laying out the duties. What can they expect from the day-to-day? Again, this is going to be used as your basis for expectations, and this is how you're also going to communicate to the team of, here's what you can expect day in and day out. Here, applicant who wants to work here, here's how it's going to work. This is what I'm going to expect of you. And just making sure that what's in your job description, again, is not so broad that it's not relevant to the actual position. So first and foremost, take the time to create these job descriptions. Really good news for you. If you do not want to take the time or this sounds really overwhelming, which I do not blame you, HR for Health does have job descriptions that are preset. Check all of these boxes that are listed out, and you can customize them, of course, of what you want for your specific office, but we do have those available as well. So let's do another poll as we move into the interview process. Do you have a set of defined interview questions? Yes, yes, that they could probably use some tweaking. Yes, that they aren't formal. I asked different questions to different people, or no. I'll give everybody a second to answer those.
In the meantime, we had one question come in about
Yeah.
the felonies that you asked. Can you give an example of a felony that would not be pertinent to a dental office?
If they had a felony for maybe like drinking and driving, that maybe necessarily would not translate to a work in a dental office. So it's really important to have, again, in your job description, clear what this employee is supposed to do. If they've been convicted of a felony for embezzling and they're applying for a financial coordinator position, and you have what is listed out as the financial coordinator position, of course, that is good reason not to hire them. So it's just being really careful of not asking those questions too early on and then having the job description that can back it up. And again, I would always recommend calling us and just making sure you're doing it correctly before putting anything out there. And again, we can give you the employment applications, but that would be an example of something that in a dental office would obviously not really fly as embezzlement for a financial coordinator.
Perfect. And then a poll recap, 37% said yes, but they could use some tweaking. 31% said yes, but they aren't formal. And then 23% with no and 10% yes.
Okay. Well, we have everybody kind of all over the board right now. So that's great. We will cover it kind of from A to Z. So when we look at the interview process, first and foremost, you want to document all of the answers. And you want those notes onto why you didn't pick specific candidates. Keep resumes on file, keep employment applications on file, and keep these answers that you're documenting on file for at least 3 years. You want to ask the same questions for consistency. So we recommend having a template of the same questions that you can fill out as you're asking, and your team can, because we realize that your team might help in the interview process as well. And just because it's not you that's doing it all the time, that doesn't mean things don't need to be documented consistently. So make sure you're setting your team up for success as well. When we're looking at the questions to create, and by the way, not all the questions you ask have to be the same for all positions. So it's really just consistency among the specific position that you're hiring for. So as you're going through these questions, you want to avoid questions that might give you too much information about things that could protect them. So disability, age, medical information, marriage status, the list goes on and on. So it's not that the questions that you're asking in the interview necessarily violate laws specifically, but the problem is that when you ask about an applicant's inclusion in those protected class, then that can lead to discovery of whether somebody is in that protected class. And then if you don't hire them, there could be a story around that. So for example, just to give you a real life story, we actually had a Henry Schein rep that we are working with out of Oregon that contacted us because one of their doctors was really innocently had an interview with somebody. That person happened to be pregnant. They sent an email follow-up to that employee saying, and just briefly mentioned, it was a whole email follow-up after the interview, briefly mentioned, congratulations on your pregnancy, really just a throwaway comment. did not end up hiring that employee and got a $50,000 lawsuit brought to them kind of right off the bat after they didn't hire them. So we want to avoid making comments like that. Of course, it's our natural instinct to be friendly, to be chatty, to get to know these people that we're bringing into our office. But just having in mind as we go through this this guide, and again, what you text in, I have the lead digit up again, that you want to avoid asking things in a certain way, and we give you a way to ask them so you can still obtain the information you really want, but in a way that's safe. So when you're developing your questions, ask yourself, what's the purpose of each question? What is the underlying information I'm really trying to get? And can I ask it directly, or is there a different way for me to ask it? And then does the question provide information that you want on the candidate's ability to complete an essential job function? So again, we are naturally friendly people. We want to get to know people, but maybe are questions actually contributing to us learning how well they can do the job, or maybe are we just nosy, or is it somewhere in between? So examples of what not to ask and versus how to ask it. So if we are dying to know if somebody has children, what is it that you really want to know? What is it that you're really concerned about? Usually it's, can you show up when I need you to show up? So a different way to ask that question is, are you able to meet the attendance requirements of this position? Please never ask anybody how old they are. Is really all you need to know is, are you over the age of 18? Can you work here legally? Are you religious? Not sure why you would need to know this other than their availability. And so another way to ask this is, are you available on weekends? Always going back to, are you available for this schedule that I'm saying you need to work? If they say yes and they're available for the schedule, then that's all you really need to know. Also, some other questions, asking them what interests them about working for the practice, what caused you to seek new employment. That's absolutely relevant question that you're able to ask. How would you describe your chairside manner? Our practice hours are blank and our expectations for you to work them are blank. Will you be able to do that? So just asking questions that are really contributing to the underlying job functions that we've laid out in our job description. And just remember that these notes that you're documenting can be viewed. Of course, if a candidate complains that there was a discriminatory process that happened. So just make sure that whatever you're noting is what you would be okay with anyone to see if you didn't actually hire them, and notating why you didn't hire them. And please don't have like a secondary secret note that you're keeping about the real reasons you're not hiring them. Make sure it's just one document that is for each candidate, has the same questions with their answers on it, and you're saying why you weren't hiring the other candidates. Also a note here, salary history inquiries. There are state-specific laws that are starting to go into effect. There are also some federal laws about equal pay. Please don't ask about what they are currently making in salary. You're not really allowed to do that depending on where you are. So again, our team can provide clarity for you. Remember that document that you're getting when you text us is a federal document, so there could be some state stuff. Reach out to our team to clarify. But make sure if you are learning what their salary expectations or what their salary is at their current position or before, that's something they're voluntarily providing. That's not something you're asking, not something on the employment application. You can instead ask what their salary expectations are. That's totally fine. It's just you can't ask them what they made before. And then we recommend doing a phone interview before an in-person, even a video interview, just to save you some time if the candidates aren't a right fit. We realize that a lot of practices are experiencing no-shows right now when they're setting up interviews. So a video interview could be a good first step, just so it doesn't waste your time or theirs. How to hire the best talent as well. So look at your overall offering, competitive pay. We get asked all the time, what are the doctors doing, like the other doctors that you work with doing in terms of sick leave, vacation, PTO, what's competitive? Our team can definitely help you with that, but make sure you're just looking, are we being competitive? 401k, time off. Using benefits, you can use these benefits as a way to get creative with an employee if in terms of negotiating an offer. So if you can't offer maybe more in terms of hard dollar compensation, you could get creative with maybe offering them more vacation, making an exception for them if they are in a special role that you really, really need to bring on board. 401k is really big too. As a FYI, there are multiple states that are starting to roll out required 401k offerings. So Illinois and California have their hat in the ring right now. If you're in either of those states, just be aware that they're requiring you either offer some sort of retirement plan or you have to enroll in a state offered retirement plan. If any of you guys have any interest of learning more about a super competitive 401k plan, you can contact our team. It is something that we were rolling out, especially because of these requirements with the law, and we want to make sure you can get the best rates out there. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. But finding somebody also that has the same goals and values as your practice. So if somebody is used to more structured day-to-day with a fewer curveballs, then they probably aren't right for your startup practice in the long term, and vice versa. So make sure that you're asking questions about that and really getting a feel for the culture fit, not just the job duties themselves. So looking at the offer and background checks, this is definitely where we see some pitfalls. So let's jump right into it on the offer letter. Your offer letter, you should always be providing one, and it should outline things like their start date, their rate of pay, job title, the practice. You just want to let them know, hey, this is where you should go, as well as an at-will statement. So there's no sort of implied employment agreement or that it's a contract. Make sure that there's wording in there that they're at will. The employee should sign the offer letter and you should retain a copy of that. Little tip here, add as a contingency statement in your offer letter, say this offer is contingent on X if there is something you want to do. So obviously we're going to talk about background checks in a second. If you are requiring somebody to do a background check, then write that in their offer letter. This is contingent on a successful completion of a background check or a reference check, for example. And when we look at the background checks, these cannot be completed until after the offer is made. And you need to have the candidate's consent in writing that you are allowed to do a background check. So there's a lot of different background checks that you can do, but you want to make sure that you are using a reputable company that knows the laws that restrict what information you're allowed to obtain, and then using that information to make certain employment decisions. So you cannot be discriminating, of course, on a person's race or color, sex, religion, disability. So what's also important is that you're having everyone do background checks. It's not just a specific person. It's the same across the board for everyone you're offering positions to. And you must tell them that you're using the background check as part of your decision-making process. I would recommend that's either on the employment application or it's a separate authorization. That's always a good idea. And then again, using a reputable company. And last but not least, make sure you maintain that for at least a year, even if you don't hire them. And then on reference checks, we definitely recommend these. Unfortunately, about 50 to 80% of resumes submitted by job applicants right now could contain some sort of false information. So reference checks allow for verification of information provided on that employment application and resume. It can provide additional skills on their performance and work history. And it can also help protect you from negligent hiring. So if you're using that as a reason, a reference check as a reason for not hiring somebody, you want to have that in writing. And again, make sure you get the consent from the applicant that you're allowed to do that reference and that they are providing you the references, and make sure you're keeping the questions job related. So also, please don't look them up on Facebook. There's a reason why background check companies do not offer social media search services. The information that you would find out, you're not supposed to know. So please avoid that. Also, we've seen people noticing on resumes, oh, they worked for my friend, I'm just going to call them. Do not do that. Make sure you're getting that confirmation from the applicant that you're allowed to reach out to the references and that they're providing who their references would be. All right, one more poll as we go into onboarding. So how many documents do your employees sign when they start with your practice? So it's about 2 to 3, 4 to 7, 8 to 12, 13 to 20. Anyone who answers D is definitely an overachiever.
I can tell you we do have a few overachievers on this webinar.
Oh.
Just a few. But it's looking like it's pretty close between 2 to 3 and 4 to 7.
Okay, great. And really that is pretty common. About 2 to 4, we would say is really common. So when we look at onboarding, here are just some tips of how to really welcome your employee in. So just like you would welcome a new patient in, you want to welcome your employee in like you would like them to come back. So things like a welcome kit, giving them a coffee mug, or even just having a welcome sign in the office for them, a t-shirt, whatever it is, like some nice swag. Creating a training plan for them is really, really important. Create a training plan for the first few weeks at least, and provide that training plan to the employee. Give them that transparency of here's what's going to happen every day, minute by minute or hour by hour, however detailed you want to get it. And also, here's who's going to help you with these training items. Outlining for them, here's who you're going to work with for a while. And on that note, also assigning them a mentor is a great way to not only build the mentee, but also the mentor. And it can also help delegate some things off of your plate specifically. So those are really recommended to help start things off, to get that new employee right into the culture, to work with the team hands-on and know what's expected of them. So communicating to the employee, just even day one, what should they expect? When should they arrive? Where should they go on their first day? If their schedule is going to be different initially for their training period, when that schedule will go back to what you expect them to work usually on a day in and day out. Any new COVID policies that they should be aware of, making sure that things that are specific to your office that they know. Don't assume just because they have experience that they understand how your office works. I think that's a common misconception we have is, oh, this person has a ton of experience, but not necessarily with you, with your practice, with your culture, with your values. And that was a big deal. Remember 20 minutes ago, when we were talking about what you should be looking for when you're hiring and to have that great fit, it's really important to not assume that they might know certain things. So onboarding new hire paperwork. So on average, there are about 12 to 18 documents required per state. So this varies per state. Definitely text that talent 21-44222. That's going to give you a list of all the federal documents. It's not state specific, but that our team can, of course, help you with. That's something that we can help with. But the reason why there's so many documents and the reason why this is so hard to stay up on is because documents are constantly changing. And the reason why is because laws are constantly changing. So new laws usually roll out, and then there's amendment to those laws. And every time there's a new law plus an amendment and then another totally unrelated new law, that usually results in new documents coming to the forefront. And so these are changing all the time. So the number is increasing. If you're in California, you're pushing 20 at this point. And similar with states like New York, I think it's even more than that. So it's really important that you have all these required documents and that you're able to keep those on file for at least 3 years post-employment. And the reality with onboarding is it takes an average of 54 administrative tasks to onboard employees, which is insane. I mean, that could take you hours and hours, but that also doesn't even include the 10 times that you're going to have to remind them to sign their paperwork and the 3 times you'll show them how to clock in and the hundreds of times that you're going to have to say, forget to take your rest breaks. And so the good news is we have created a way to make this really easy for you because we know it is so hard to keep up on. And so if you're using our software to onboard an employee, it's actually our most popular feature because of those 54 administrative tasks, I think. But all required and recommended, it's actually not just required that we'll provide you, but all recommended documents as well are going to automatically send to an employee on their very first day of hire. And the employee is just going to electronically fill those out and sign them directly in the software. No printing, nothing that you have to sit with them and go over documents. It's completely explained to them of what each document is and what they're supposed to do with it. And so it saves so much time for both you, and it creates transparency for the employee. This is a little bit about what it looks like. You can see we have mandatory, recommended, informational documents. Our team also maintains these documents, which is great because they're changing all the time. So you don't really have to worry about it. We'll also make sure that any existing employees that should get new documents are getting those sent to them versus if it's just for new hires moving forward. And then you can also customize this if you want so that you can add your own practice-specific policies in here, and the employees can access them whenever they want, which is great for creating that transparency and efficiencies that we've been talking about. Again, just a little note, if you do not have 12 to 18 documents for your existing employees as well, it doesn't mean that we get to just forget them. You want to make sure you get those updated for your existing team members. All right, so as we go into retention, really recommend doing ongoing check-ins and feedback from not just the new hires, but also from your team. How are things going? Promoting transparency and showing support for your new team members are huge. Doing introductory reviews and these check-ins to see how their training is going, and not just that, but where do they need more support? This isn't just about what they can give you. What can you give them in more support? And clearly outlining expectations is really big. So looking at how can I create the most transparency and consistency are the biggest significant factors in retention. It's really where you want to look. So how can I create the most transparency and show support? So these reviews that you're doing, these should be documented. Use those job descriptions that you just worked so hard on, or you just got from HR for Health, as a point of reference to build on those skills and lay out the goals of here's what's next and keeping track of what they're actually doing. Clear expectations outlined in your handbook. This is could not be stated more. Your employee handbook is, of course, the lifeline of your practice in terms of expectations for your policies, but here's the kicker. You have to actually make sure you're using those policies. So first and foremost, give them the handbook. That should be day one, that they understand the policies. You should highlight in there for them, if you'd like, of these are the ones we really care about. If you are a stickler for tardiness and that's a big point of contention for you, make sure they know that. Be transparent and have that policy in your handbook. But then make sure you're using it. This is the biggest way that issues happen in practices, is that practices aren't necessarily using the handbook. You're saying, here are my expectations, but then they're not actually upheld. So if you have a policy in your handbook regarding cell phone use, and your employees are not supposed to use their cell phones in front of patients, but your front desk, who you love because they're the most efficient person, is on their cell phone, and you let that slide because you love their work ethic, that is A, not following your policy, and B, creating resentment among the rest of your team. And it's confusing for them because it's like, okay, where am I being held accountable? I'm being told this is my parameters, but not everybody's being held accountable, or nobody is. This also happens a lot of the time. We see it with sick and vacation policies. Our doctors, before they work with us, will have something written in their handbook that is not at all what they're doing. And employees get super confused from the beginning because their policy states one thing, but they're actually doing something completely different. So we want to make sure that your handbook is actually being used and not just a document that you're putting out there and not holding them accountable for it. And then doing ongoing performance reviews and check-ins, making sure you are aware of when their probationary period is ending. We like to call it an introductory period, actually, not a probationary period, but knowing when that's ending, congratulating them, having those conversations, talking about next steps. The other thing, little bonus for everyone to know, employees really like to get paid correctly. So they expect to get paid overtime if they've worked it, and if they are eligible for overtime. This is something, if your handbook, which it needs to, lay out when employees are going to get paid, when our paydays are, and here's how you can get your checks. Make sure you're actually paying them when we say we're going to pay them. Sick and vacation time, I already gave that example of if your policy says one thing and you're doing another, that can be really frustrating for an employee. And it goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of your employees now expect the same efficiencies when they are at work as they are getting as consumers. So they expect to be able to see this stuff in real time. They want to know What are my hours? When am I getting paid? When am I allowed to request time off? And have that total visibility. Even something as small as, or seemingly small as remembering their anniversaries or their birthdays, that stuff matters. So pay attention to that right from the beginning, and it can really make a difference in terms of retention. This is an example of the HR for Health system of how employees are able to see their hours that they have available. They can request it off right through the system. You wouldn't believe how much of a difference this makes from a team member of just ease of use of being able to work smarter, not harder, know everything up front. Not to mention, there are definitely some state laws around having this stuff transparent and documented all in one place. But outside of compliance, it's just a great way to have the employees know that you care about them. And the best way to show them you care is to pay them correctly. So as we wrap up, I really want to highlight, again, your team is expecting a great experience when they're at work. And this is the best way to start off on the right foot. We were created because software is a necessity. Automation is a necessity for compliance. But now, that was 10 years ago. We're now in a world where employees want things right away. They want to be able to see all of this stuff that we have listed here. And so just even something as simple as reminding them to take their rest breaks can mean a lot for an employee, but that's really hard for you to do every single day, multiple times a day, not to mention for all these employees. So being able to have a software that just has a pop-up, hey, don't forget to take your rest break today. You're compliant and you're showing your team that you care. On the flip side, you should know if you're a stickler with tardiness, you should be able to keep track of when your employees are tardy in real time. Get notified when they clock in early. If they're working unauthorized overtime, you need to be notified. So we've built all these things in the system to make it super easy for you to keep track of these things. Job descriptions automatically sent to an employee and signed. We give you notifications when it's time to do a performance review. So it's really all encompassing. Plus the handbook and HR support, that's just an added bonus. It's really making sure that you're staying up on their day-to-day and seeing these different improvements, using the job description to do performance reviews, actually doing performance reviews on time, getting those notifications if it's somebody's anniversary or birthday can mean the world of a difference. And having templates in our software to be able to do it makes it so easy that it doesn't take you a ton of time. You don't have to continue to avoid it. Since I personally don't love performance reviews, but this is a way to make it easier. So as we wrap up and go into questions, I just want to remind everyone about the texting option. So you can text 44222, the word talent21 to get a list of the state-specific documents. I'm sorry, federal-specific documents. These are not state-specific. These are federal, but a great starting point to make sure you have all of these on file for every employee, every new hire moving forward. And just a note on this, these documents can change at any time, any moment. So just know that once you have this list, it's a great starting point, but you've got to make sure you're staying up on these law updates and when you need new documents so that your current employees are up to date as well as any future ones. And then that list of questions to ask or not to ask, we have in there as well that you will get from texting. And our email is down there, compliance@hrfiles.com. If you have any questions, or if you, again, would like that HR risk assessment, our team can go through that with you in detail. So here's our contact information as well. And Adam, let's, I think, spend the remainder of time on questions if we have them.
Oh, we have them. All right.
Okay.
Let's see. I thought PTO had to be the same for everyone. Is that not the case?
Great question. No, there do have to be some consistencies, but you can group certain employees. So full-time employees can have different time off options than part-time employees, but as well as positions. So let's say your clinical employees or even a subset of that, like your front office team versus your hygienist, you can subgroup team members to have different time off depending on, and especially if you're bringing in a position, like we get a very common question is, I'm ready to hire an associate. They are negotiating on time off. This is my normal policy. And associates, you've never had one before. It's a brand new position and it's a different type of position than everyone else. You can definitely use PTO and vacation to try to win them over.
What about jury service or jury duty?
Offering jury duty? That's the question.
Just says jury service options. So interpret that as you want.
Yeah. So there are state-specific requirements with jury duty. So it depends what state you're in. But if you can email our team directly at compliance@hrpulse.com, we will absolutely get you for your specific situation details around that.
Do we have to inform them for basic background check? I think you said yes, but can you
Yes.
confirm that? Yep.
Absolutely inform them, and you want them to actually give you that consent, meaning they're signing off that, yes, you're allowed to do a background check. And if they won't do it, then you can absolutely make that a contingency of employment and say, okay, we can't move forward with you. But you definitely have to get their consent.
If they provide references, isn't that implied consent?
If they provide references, yeah, absolutely. So background checks and references or checks are a little bit different. Background checks could potentially unveil a little bit more information. So that's a separate subject of making sure that most of the time your background check company that you're using will give you a document to provide to the applicant to give the consent needed. Reference checks, though, yes, if they're providing you reference checks, we would recommend still having a consent form, but it's kind of all in one where it's listing their references, and then at the bottom, they're acknowledging and signing that you're allowed to use it.
And this question, I am guessing, is relating to the HR for Health software, but does this work with ADP Workforce now?
So we do not integrate with ADP. We have our own payroll solution for actually cutting checks. If you would like to opt into that, if you're interested, if you're using ADP, I would say your prices are probably better with us. Just can tell you that from experience. But if you want to keep ADP for processing payroll, we would still say use our time clock for all the other things I was talking about, like clocking in early, phone for time notifications, rest breaks, meal breaks, all that stuff that keeps you compliant. And then you can actually just submit your timesheets to ADP directly.
When specifying essential functions, is it appropriate to say that the ability or willingness to drive in the snow is okay? This is a surprisingly big problem for New England.
Interesting. I will follow up with you individually to see what state you're in, specifically to depending on where you're at in New England. And it might be. It could be maybe not an essential function, but instead saying this is our schedule, you have to be willing to make this rain or shine at this time and using it that way. But we'll make sure to reach, I'll get your information from Adam, and our team will absolutely make sure to reach out to confirm where, depending on where you are.
Excellent. Are there any background check companies that you would recommend? Also, how do you get a nationwide background check?
A nationwide background check. Are you in all 50 states? That would be my first question. But to answer the first part of the question, we recommend and we refer out to HireRight. They're a really good option. Again, we'll make sure to follow up with you. Our team can send you a couple resources, but that is a primary one that we've had good experiences with and tend to know the laws in and out of what you're allowed to get and what you're not allowed to get.
Do you have an idea for just a general ballpark range on how much a typical background check would cost?
I don't, unfortunately. I can't remember the last time that I have personally referred out to them, but again, we can get you, we'll absolutely send HireRight's information, and their pricing can be included in that as well. I know it's somewhere, I just don't have it off the top of my head.
Please talk more about video interviews prior to personal interviews. Don't these provide info on potential discriminatory issues that may hurt you if you don't offer them a personal interview or hire them?
So a video interview would be a step in your process, just like a phone interview. So what I would recommend is the very first step is you're having a phone interview with that person. And then if they pass you have the same questions that you're asking them in the interview as everyone else. And you've identified these are the questions and answers we need to move them forward to the next round, then everyone would get a video interview the second round. So that's essentially across the board. That's just a part of your process. You have them do the video interview. Same thing, you have certain number of questions that you're asking them, same ones for everyone. And then if you wanted to meet them in person before hiring, again, right now it's kind of weird with COVID, but if you want them to come in, then that can be like the third step. So that's a very important distinction of you can totally do it, just making sure you're offering the same process and road to hiring for everyone applying to the position.
But in terms of overtime pay, how do you handle employees that clocked into work a few minutes early or worked a few minutes after scheduled work hours?
Yeah, so this is for sure nationwide, no matter where you are. Biggest pain point for doctors across the country is milking the clock. The biggest mistake you can make, I can tell you, is not paying overtime if it's worked. That is usually what doctors will do, or we'll see practices do, and that creates issues twofold. Because one, you're out of compliance at that point, you owe them money. But two, that can definitely create resentment from the team member if they feel that they're owed a certain amount of money. So if you are an HR for Health customer, what I would tell you is you're using our time clock so that you are notified in real time when they clock in before you tell them they can. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're not paying them, but you're also using the overtime notification, so you're covered on both ends. And then you're writing them up. You're referencing your handbook policy that you have that says you're not allowed to work unauthorized overtime. This is unauthorized overtime, because working overtime is a behavioral issue that's usually responded with cutting pay or deducting pay that maybe they did work overtime once in a while. So it's really important to still pay them so that you're totally kosher, but you need to address that behavior immediately and nip it in the bud, because it is such a problem. And if you're not able to know when it's happening right away, or having that verification of, I just got an email that Adam clocked in and I can see him walking around, like putting his stuff away or getting coffee, that you can address it right then and there and have that write up so that the behavior stops immediately.
What do you do if an applicant shares information that reveals they're in a protected class?
Yeah. So if they do that, it's important to have that documentation, as I was mentioning, of why you don't hire them, and the reason, essentially, why you're hiring one applicant over the other. And you just can't have those reasons be because they're in a protected class. So that's why the job descriptions are super important, because versus their resume and the questions you're asking. Because if you're not hiring them because of all other reasons besides the protected class, and that's documented, and you have that documented, you're literally writing out, this person did not meet X qualification, again, that's not a protected class reason, then you should be totally safe. And if there's anything that's a little bit risky or seems touchy, please reach out to us. Again, pregnancy is the number one question that you want to be careful of, and information that you want to obtain. So you just want to keep it as objective as possible to what the actual position needs. But you can always reach out to us if something seems a little fishy, or if you have questions.
All right, we'll go two more questions here.
Okay.
If someone is a salaried employee and misses work from time to time, do you deduct pay at all?
Yeah. So if somebody is a salaried employee, so what salaried employees are, if they are truly an exempt employee, and that can be a whole other webinar of exempt versus non-exempt, but a true exempt employee is a manager that oversees multiple employees, has business making decisions. So if it's like a true office manager and they're fine to be on salary, what salary assumes, or exempt employees assumes, is that they're working a 40-hour week and you're paying them based on that. So if they don't work a full day, that's usually safe to deduct pay. If they are not working a full week, for sure, you just want to make sure they're not actually working. So you want to absolutely communicate with that employee, hey, if you're out, you're out. Like you're not working, you're not checking an email, you're not texting us, like you actually have to be out. So there's no risk of not paying them. But in the event where they truly don't work, yes, you can deduct a day of pay from them.
And the last question, do you have a guess as to when people will start applying for jobs again? We don't necessarily want to settle when hiring, but we do need help.
I wish I had my crystal ball to tell you the answer to that question. Even at HR for Health, we are experiencing something similar. It just seems to be something in the water with the job market. I'm hoping that when things start to open up again, and we're able to start going to conferences, and they're able to have CE units in person and just kind of have a better experience at work, not having to wear all the PPE and stuff, that it will start to get better. So I'm hoping, again, by like Q3, maybe end of this year, fingers crossed. But I get it. We're in the same boat. And it is that balance of finding a great applicant and a great hire, not settling, but also making sure that your patients have the people and the team there that need to support them. So I would recommend also, there are always like temp options. You can find some really good team members that maybe go from office to office and are kind of just on their own, and can work for you, once a month or whatever when you need coverage to kind of get you through until then. And again, if you do go that route, please let us know if you have questions on how to onboard a temp employee, because we didn't go through that today. It's a little bit different.
Great. Well, that'll do it for us tonight. Thank you, everyone, for all the questions. And of course, Jill, thank you for your time. Super important content. As a thank you for attending today, everyone will receive the recording of this webinar via email sometime in the next week. So keep your eyes out for that. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you back here soon. Have a great night.
Thanks, everyone.